pause now for a moment and bring in infectious disease Dr. Ulysses Wu from St. Francis Hospital. Now, we're seeing Mayor Dandrew taking a step back despite the warnings of Triple E. How significant are the concerns? How significant is the risk for everyday people out there?
I don't think there's a good answer for that, because what we have now is that we do have 2 deaths in the state from a disease that hasn't really made much of an appearance in the state for quite some time. I do agree it's not a reason to panic. But when it comes to public education, the best thing to do is provide awareness and provide education for them, to make them aware. So not necessarily to panic, but take the necessary precautions to make sure that this disease doesn't happen to you.
But a lot of the necessary precautions would just be precautions you would take to avoid any mosquito bites. So why does it have to be anything more than that? I mean, it seems like Mayor Drew, to be honest, even though he's calling us out in part, that's a reasonable position to take, but you don't necessarily agree with what the mayor's saying.
Well,
I know, I don't want a yes or no. Of
yes.
Course, you know.
No, in the sense of a panic, I do agree with that.
Yeah.
We shouldn't panic about most of the diseases that are out there. A good example is the vaping epidemic, and how many people die from smoking every day.
Yeah,
you know,
480,000
exactly.
in the U.S. last
so,
year. Yeah.
this is a disease. Again, there are 2 deaths, and that's why this quote-unquote panic has happened. But what happens with the precautions, and the best precautions are avoiding mosquitoes at night, using repellent. That is something that people probably would not have done as much. And if there's public awareness that people are starting to be aware and do that to a certain extent, even use more mosquito repellent, that is helpful.
And there is more concern because this is more deaths that we've had from Triple E than in recent years.
Correct. That is absolutely true.
All right. Why don't you just sort of take us through the stages, because a lot of different things need to happen in order for somebody to get Eastern equine encephalitis. First of all, they need to have the virus inside them, but very few people who have the virus go on to get Triple E. I believe it's 4 to 5%.
Yes, so it's actually about 2%. And
actually,
so
2%.
Yeah,
okay.
so and it depends, because it's not a disease with a huge incidence, so it hasn't been studied, but probably about, let's say, 2 to 5%.
Okay.
So what happens is, you know, the mosquito that is predominant, it's actually in swampy, like eastern hardwood type things, red maple, cedars. I learned there's a new tree that I didn't know about, the lollipop tree or something. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Loblolly, that's exactly what it is. And the normal mosquito that transmit this does not usually transmit this to humans, but there are bridge mosquitoes. And so what happens is that they transmit it to birds. Birds become viremic, they become sick. And so these other mosquitoes that are more predominant, what they do is they take a blood meal from the mosquitoes or from the birds, and then they transmit it to humans. Humans, just like horses, which can also be transmitted to, were considered end-stage hosts, in the sense that if a mosquito was to feed on you and you had Triple E, there's not enough of a viremia that it would actually probably take.
I can't give it to somebody else.
And you can't really give it to a mosquito.
Okay.
Now, to answer your question, 2% go on to develop Triple E, but when you think about just people who are exposed to Eastern equine in general, about 1 in 30 are exposed to it. And most people, they don't get the encephalitis, they get what we call systemic illness, almost like the flu. So you get flu-like symptoms. 2% of those go on to get the encephalitic portion.
And how do you know if you might have it?
So the predominant disease is the flu-like syndrome that people have. And unfortunately, we're starting to see some flu. So it's going to be hard to tell. And you can tell by my congestion, I actually had a cold recently as well. And I was shaken there. And so you start with fevers, nausea, vomiting, and headache. That is the normal prodrome that you have. When you start developing neurological signs, seizures being a big component, becoming comatose, other focal neurological signs, that's when you have to start worrying about encephalitis.
Okay. Dr. Wu, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're quite welcome.
A little more information.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Good to have you.